day, wishing me heart it was Sunday, drinking wine and beer all the week, time for whiskey on a Sunday.
Well, hello everyone. You are all indeed very welcome in joining me for this pre-recorded edition of my usually live Instagram series, Whiskey on a Sunday, with me, Sam for All. So now, as this Sunday falls on February the 14th, Valentine's Day, I elected to record the video in advance so that for all the lovers out there, you know, the whiskey lovers and otherwise, that you could all devote your full attention to taking care of yourself on this day or to a special someone if you have someone in your life. So for this edition, I'm heading back to the Scottish Highlands for a look and taste of a bit of a different approach to whiskey. But first, as always, I need to remind everyone that the nature of Whiskey on a Sunday involves alcohol. So anyone watching needs to be of legal age where they live to purchase and consume alcohol where they live in order to continue watching the video. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's begin. Today I'm having a go at Deanston Virgin Oak Single Malt Whiskey. So this is a Scottish single malt whiskey. The name Deanston, the name itself has been around for a long time. However, I find it doesn't get mentioned very often in whiskey discussions. Now, perhaps that's just coincidence and that I just haven't come across it. Or perhaps it has more to do with Deanstons themselves being relative newcomers to the Scotch market. You see, their history goes back to the 1780s with the opening of a cotton mill on the banks of the River Teith. Now, originally called Adelphi and then renamed Deanston, that's the cotton mill, was originally named Adelphi, then it was renamed Deanston in 1785. Their opening coincided with the start of Scotland's, let's call it rebirth, from being focused mainly on farming and agriculture to now being that of industrialization. So the cotton mill, it became a success very, very quickly. So much so that a small village had to be built in order to accommodate the housing for the 300 plus workers that they had in the very early 1800s. So that was a little innovative. And with these guys, innovation continued as, seeing that this new village, Deanston, it became the first village to have gas lighting in all of Scotland. So nobody else had it until these guys did. And you know what? The innovation didn't stop there. In 1831, the mill management folks, they had the vision to construct a unique weaving shed with high arches and a waterproof roof that was covered by 3 feet of soil. Now, at the time when it was built, this prevented the cotton from temperature fluctuations, the cotton that was inside. It prevented it from fluctuating and it prevented the cotton from being damaged. But, lo and behold, that would eventually prove to be a perfect place to mature whiskey. Now, 1949 saw more innovative steps being taken when electrical turbines were installed, and that means that sustainable energy was the only thing now powering the mill. And folks, that remains in place today with their whiskey production. So that's pretty cool in my opinion. The cotton industry itself kind of fell apart in Scotland anyways in the 1960s, and the mill itself eventually closed. Now the building started becoming fitted to become a distillery shortly thereafter, and the first whiskey produced came off the line in 1974 with what was then called the Deanston Highland Single Malt. All right, so that's some background, but I know what you're thinking. What about the actual whiskey, and what's the deal with the Virgin Oak statement in the name? Never fear, Some for All is here. And I'm here to answer both those great questions. So this whiskey is indeed a single malt. So for those of you that have seen some of my other shows, you'll know what that means. For any newcomers, single malt here means that the whiskey itself has been distilled in pot stills and is produced at only one distillery, and it's been produced with 100% malted barley. So that's the characteristics that make up single malt. So it checks all those boxes. It also means that the whiskey has been aged for at least 3 years. That's the law in Scotland. If you're going to make whiskey, Scottish whiskey, it has to be aging a minimum of 3 years. Now, from Deanstons themselves, we know that this whiskey is somewhere between 6 to 8 years old. So that's still a fairly young whiskey, right? When you take a look at what else is on the market. So we're thinking young whiskey here. Okay, right. So now, what about that virgin oak statement? Well, it's a bit of a marketing ploy, in my opinion. Now, here's why. I mean, technically, it's true that some of the brand new oak, which is what they're meaning for virgin oak, so oak that hasn't been used for anything else before. So, there is some new oak barrels, brand new oak barrels being used. But they really only come into play for a very short time, and after it's already seen 6 or more years aging in more traditional ex-bourbon casks. So, the exact details are tough to come by, but I'm thinking, that after being in the ex-bourbon cask for, 6 years or 7 years, because Deanston said this whiskey is between 6 and 8 years old. So after it's done, it's 6 to 8 years in the ex-bourbon cask, or more or less that 6 to 8 years, that the whiskey is then what I'm going to call finished in brand new American oak barrels for a few months, maybe 4 to 6 months. And that's the difference. It's finished. It's stuck in there, but for a very, very short period of time. So, again, Deanston's is not telling a lie in the name of the whiskey, but they're taking a bit of poetic license, let's say, in my opinion. All right, now it's time to dive into the whiskey. So 46.3% ABV, no age statement. Again, we think it's somewhere between 6 to 8 years. That's what Deanston is saying. So 46% ABV, no age statement, and it's also non-chill filtered. Now, for those that may be wondering what chill filtering is or what it does, very quickly, it's essentially a process that a lot of distilleries use to ensure that the whiskey stays clear after bottling. So what they do is, prior to bottling the whiskey, they'll chill it way down to about 0 degrees Celsius. That freezes any of the tiny bits of protein or fatty acids or esters that are found in the product. It's then filtered, which captures these bits, and then it gets bottled without them. So the upside to doing this is that it prevents those little teeny bits from potentially causing the whiskey to haze a little bit. The downside is that anytime you remove things from a whiskey, you run the risk of altering its taste and its profile. So the folks at Deanston, they want you to taste their full product, haze be damned, if you will. So it's non-chill filtered. Okay, off we go to taste. Again, 46.3 alcohol by volume. I'd say that's kind of harvest gold in color. On the nose, and we do the 1, 2, 3, right? Acclimatize the nose. 1, how are you? 2, nice to meet you. 3, hope you smell delicious. Okay, nose is now ready. So salt, citrus, and sweet notes for me pop out right away. Lemon, some ripe orange, salty sea air, some ripe Granny Smith apple in here for me, candied orange and candied lemon. Also getting some honey, some floral, and some barley that are in here. Growing up, my granny always had these little tea biscuits called social tea biscuits. So if you know what they are, I smell that in here. I also smell some spice like nutmeg, some white chocolate. I'm getting some vanilla coming through, and some dry cedar tones. The nose, it's quite nice. Not too intense, but it's not a weak nose either. All right, so now, Judgment Day. What's it taste like? On the palate. Okay, so it's light and a bit loose, and then it's sharp right away. There's a little sting on the tongue and on my gums right away. Now that goes away quickly, but it does leave my gums a bit hot. It's a bit thin, with, now I'm getting a very little bit of orange and a little bit of green apple. Getting a little rosemary, some thyme, you know, some herbal notes in there, some pine resin, some light honey. Sea salt and barley are coming through, a little ginger. And now I'm starting to get some vanilla cream, some white pepper, some black pepper, a little charcoal, some oaky cedar notes. And then for a finish, I'm going to say it's about a medium length finish. There's spice. I'm getting a touch of honey. Lots of dry wood, cedar, oak, dry cedar, dry oak notes, and then my gums are staying pretty hot. You know, look, there's no doubt this is a young whiskey, right? But we knew that going in. Overall, I really like the nose. I'm going to be honest, I like the nose. On the palate, truthfully, and I always said I would be truthful, it's not a favorite of mine right now. You know, on the mouth, it's light and slippery, which I don't mind at all. However, to me, and in my opinion, the alcohol seems a bit out of balance, and the flavors are a bit clunky for me. You know, when I say clunky, I mean that they don't seem to work together. There's really nothing harmonious happening here. You know, the flavors seem to pop in and then pop out all on their own. Now, to be fair, I will come back to this whiskey again in a few weeks, as I've said this before, continue to say it. When tasting whiskey and other alcohol products, but we're talking whiskey, when you're tasting whiskey, so many things can affect what you think of the whiskey that day. You know, your mood, your energy level, your surroundings, what you've eaten that day, etc. So I will come back to it. If my opinion changes drastically, I will do another video. But for now, I'm thinking that if I go to this, it may be a cocktail whiskey for me. We'll see. My impression could change later. So, how can you find it? Well, here in Ontario, LCB stock number 375568. It's $49.95 for a 750 milliliter bottle. In the US, I've seen it on websites for about $29 a bottle. Now, keep in mind, folks, your impression may be very different than mine. So, of course, I'd never tell you to skip this one. What I would do, though, is I will strongly suggest trying to taste it before you buy it. Look, you may indeed love it, and I'm certainly not saying it's a bad whiskey. For me, it's just not for me, at least not right now. Again, things could change. And truthfully, that's part of the majesty of whiskey, right? Everyone likes different things, and there's lots of product to appeal to all the varying tastes out there. So, folks, that's a wrap for this edition of Whiskey on a Sunday. Please join me next week when I will once again indeed be live on Instagram, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sunday evening. Until then, be warm out there because it's pretty cold here on the acreage. Be safe, be well, and cheers from Song for All.